everyone, it's Matt Munson here, and you are watching the first episode of the Project Workbench. The idea behind the Project Workbench is to consolidate a few different ideas I had. I want to include things like interviews, on-location shoots, events, things like prop parties, and also show some of the projects I'm working on without having to have a dedicated series for that project. There'll still be a separate series for the Matmobile, but things like the grapple gun or mold making tutorials, stuff like that will all be included here. This first episode of the Project Workbench is part one of my interview with Tim Arp, who goes by the name D48 Ronin on the RPF. Tim joins us from Oregon. Tim, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, no problem.
Tim, when did you first become interested in prop building or model making?
Well, I can remember when I was a kid, probably elementary school age, my brother and I made a couple of Star Trek phasers. So I'd say I was interested from a pretty early age, but I think what piqued my interest was, I know the exact moment. It was 1979. I was 11 years old, going on 12, and I was in a bookstore, and I ran across this, the Book of Alien, which talks about the production of Ridley Scott's film. So it was at that moment that the cogs kind of locked into place and the light bulb went on, and I thought, I want to do that when I grow up.
And when did you start doing it professionally, or was it your first job?
It's probably about 1997, into 97, beginning 98. I had an aunt and uncle who lived in California, and my aunt had a friend whose son worked in the industry. He worked at Digital Domain in the model shop, and I finally decided to give it a go. So I moved out to LA, and unfortunately, by the time I got out there, he had gotten out of the industry. So I went through the phone book, sent out resumes, made phone calls, and unfortunately nobody was really interested. They didn't need anybody. So what I did do for a little while was I started volunteering for student films at USC and AFI, which is the American Film Institute. And it wasn't what I wanted to be doing, obviously, but I'm glad I did it because it was pretty interesting and pretty neat to see what goes into actually making a movie. So it was good in that respect. But I did keep looking for stuff that would relate more to what I was interested in. And I did come across a guy who was in the process of trying to make a proposed pilot for a science fiction television series. And he had a prop guy, and the prop guy needed some help. So he put me in touch with him, and showed this guy my stuff, which at that point wasn't a whole lot. You know, a few custom lightsabers, and I had done a Ralph McQuarrie style concept Boba Fett outfit, which he was pretty jazzed about, so we hit it off over that. And after that project, which unfortunately didn't really go anywhere, he started hiring me for small jobs. And my first real paying job was building some stuff for Rob Zombie. What we made was this big 18-foot tall robot, the Creeper, which was basically a giant wearable puppet. My friend was wearing the upper half. It was a backpack frame, with a skeleton built up out of PVC pipe, and it was skinned with upholstery foam, and the foam was coated with latex. And then he was standing up on a raised platform in a cart, and I was hunkered down in the cart, pushing him around. We actually subsequently went out on tour with the band, and we performed during the show. So anyway, I'm hunkered down in this cart, and I can't see anything, so I'm following a fluorescent green gaffer's tape path that's laid out on the stage with X's where I have to make turns and all whatnot. And
cool.
Yeah, so that was my first job, and I'm glad I did it, and it was interesting, but I would never do that again.
Tim, can you rattle off the names of some of the movies you've worked on where we might be able to see some of your work and some of the pieces you worked on?
Ah, yes, the movies. I did finally get around to doing movie work, starting with Red Planet, and we did the spaceship miniatures there. Not a bad way to start, although I was just a resin monkey at that point. The remake of The Time Machine, again at Digital Domain. Spider-Man 2, we made the practical puppeteered Doc Ock tentacles. Actually, most of my time was spent on what we called the secondary tentacle, which was a smaller tentacle that tapered down to a point, and that came out of one of the upper main tentacles, and he would wrap it around people's waists when you would grab them. The secondary tentacle was probably about 7 feet long, and there were 145 individual vertebrae, all handmade, and each vertebrae was 1% smaller than the one that preceded it, from the big end down to the little end. So, needless to say, that was quite a bit of work, but it was fun. The day after tomorrow, there were several crews on that show. The crew I was on, we did a shot for the sequence where the ship is floating down the street between the buildings. And there's a quick underwater shot where you see the ship crush a bus. That was actually shot wet for wet in a big tank of water. Usually they'll do what they call a dry for wet shot, which is where basically you fill stage with smoke, which when you light it, it gives you a haze, which gives the appearance of shooting underwater. But anyway, we actually did ours wet for wet. The Passion of the Christ. At the moment of Christ's death, there's an earthquake, and you see inside the Hebrew temple the floor split open. When we shot that, I had the task of dropping a chunk of debris. It was like a piece of architectural detail. It was actually 2 pieces held together by a couple rare earth magnets. When I was leaning over, trying to stay out of camera, when the floor split open, I would drop this chunk of debris, and it would hit and break apart, and the big piece would tumble into the chasm. And somehow, I was able to hit it every time, on every take. I would drop it, the thing would go right in the hole, and the director is pretty amazed by that.
We're just about out of time for this episode, but there's tons more, so tune in for the next episode where we continue our interview with Tim Arp.